But great morning. Very excited to be with everybody here today. For those of you that are new, welcome to Breakthrough Mastermind Group. The premise is very simple. We are here to provide knowledge and intellect to each other in order to help leverage our business, right? We're not here to pitch our business. However, I highly recommend that you guys use that chat, connect with people that you haven't met before, and make some connections. Today's topic is on culture, and this one is absolutely paramount. Whether you are a entrepreneur, solopreneur, business owner of some fashion, or maybe you just want to change the culture within your organization already. I'm so excited to hear from Keith. Again, for those of you that didn't hear this the first time around, he has actually created a little outline for us. So I've included that in the email that was sent last night. If you want, go ahead and pull that up for the conversation today. But Keith is actually somebody very close to me. When I first started the coaching endeavor, Keith was one of the first people that reached out to me. And he was absolutely gracious. He would give information and support with nothing in return. He's just an incredible guy. I mean, he's phenomenal on the consultation side. So if you have any questions, make sure that you do reach out to him, set up some time to speak. But again, guys, it's very simple. I'm about to give him the floor. We'll give him 5 to 15 minutes to present the information, and then we're going to open it up to the group for Q&A. So if you have questions, go ahead and jot them down. But Keith, without further ado, I give you the floor.
Thank you, Keegan. I appreciate it. And look where you've come with all this, with all this mastermind group and everything, and just wonderful to see. I just want to say, no pressure, right? Culture is just like one of the biggest topics ever for business. And, the funny thing about culture, though, is that most people kind of ignore it a little bit or a lot of it. And, one way or another, your business is going to build a culture. And it should be either it's going to be intentional or it's going to be unintentional. And I think that's the main start to what anyone has to talk about when they talk about culture. Culture is kind of this untouchable, amorphous thing. And that's why I think people don't pay attention to it. And it's kind of like, I like to think of it like if you break a vase and then you glue it back together, the culture is that glue that holds it together, right? If you use like crazy glue, it stays together. If you use some garbage glue, eventually it'll just fall back apart. And it's the kind of thing, like if you're paying attention to culture, you're gonna build a strong business. If you don't pay attention to culture, eventually everything will fall apart. Peter Drucker was a famous management guru and culture guru, and he said culture always eats strategy for breakfast. And when he said it around 2006, it was probably pretty revolutionary as far as people even thinking that culture was a thing. In my experience, I was an Army guy. I've taught to corporate America, and I've been an entrepreneur, obviously. But in my experience, the Army had a good way of saying it also, right? It said anything, culture is kind of like if you have a bad plan but a good team, you're probably going to do way better than if you had a great plan and a bad team. Culture plays that part. You can do a lot with just a little bit of planning. Another thing the Army always says is that the plan itself is really nothing, but the planning that goes around building that plan is something, and it's the most important thing. And so when you think about culture in terms of business, and especially you have to think about size for an example, because when you're a startup, culture is easier, because everybody's willing to pitch in, everybody's willing to do a little bit more. Everybody kind of has this inherent vision, inherent mission just built into what they're doing. And then as you scale, as you grow, it becomes even more important to pay attention to culture because people kind of fade away from it. And it's harder to do with more people, obviously. And what you don't want is obviously for the culture to stagnate or get so far from where you came from that it isn't it isn't even viable. It doesn't make sense. But of course, if that happens, you want to go back and just reevaluate, and you can save a company. I mean, I think it was 2001 or somewhere around there when Jim Collins came out with Good to Great. And, his, if you've not read it, it's a great book, but there's a lot in there about the leadership having to make these incredible decisions around a failing business. And if I had to summarize that book, it'd be, he would be telling us all about culture, but he really does more about going into leadership. And he says leaders have to be decisive and flexible, humble, but also ambitious for the cause. And I think that ambitious for the cause portion is where culture is built around. And so obviously, and I sent out the handout, and it has this little chart on it, but at the top of the chart, it has goals, values, and a strategic plan. And the goals are just like it says on the chart, mostly, what you want to do, right? Where you're going. The values are what are you willing to do to get there. And the strategic plan is more or less the holding yourself accountable portion, right? It's the map that gets you from there to there. And those three things are super important to any company. Obviously, we went over values last week. I think that's another sort of amorphous thing to talk about. But if you're guiding your company with your goals and your values, for the most part, I think you're going to make pretty incredible decisions. That strategic plan is just the extra step that will allow you to more easily just kind of give the whole company and give everyone in the company the grand view of what you're doing. It's not just what's the goal, what's the value, but also here's how we're going to get there, and here's how we hold ourselves accountable. So those three things are fantastic, and they work together. And if you ask me what's more important, culture or strategy, I said Drucker said culture is going to eat strategy for breakfast, but I kind of think they're on a common level. You can have strategy without really paying attention to culture, but you're going to build a culture either way. You can pay attention to culture, but if you don't have a strategy, you're not going to get there. So I kind of think they're on an even keel. And then the biggest thing is when you're thinking about culture, I think you need to, and this is why I use acronym, you have to center on your culture, right? So the C stands for company, and I use that as an entity, right? It doesn't have to be an actual company. It can be a person. It can be anything you want it to be. Simon Sinek would say that he uses the example in his book, Start With Why, Apple computers. And he says they're not just computers. In fact, they changed their name from Apple computers to Apple because they didn't want to be known as just computers. And this is where I think his analogy gets a little strange, because when you say there's a culture at Apple, he says that the culture is being different. It's not about computers. It's not about technology necessarily. It's just more or less being different. And at the time, I would say that's amazing. That's true. And over time, they've kind of kept that mentality, but you can also have negative repercussions to focusing on one side of culture, because if you're a computer guy, Microsoft or Android guy like me, it kind of alienates me from the people who are buying Apple, right? So it's kind of a double-edged sword if you're not careful. And then that branches into branding and all kinds of things. But the culture itself is you have to look at the center of your company, or what your message is going to be. And I would say as a company, what you're trying to do is say, it's kind of a mix of mission and then your purpose of being. So there's a book by Matthew Kelly called The Culture Solution, and it's a great book, but he says that mission is king. And then if you look at Simon Sinek's book, he says that your why is the most important thing. I would say if you're looking at your company, you have to have a mix of the two. You have to know what the mission is, but it's an extension of why you're there in the first place. So that's the first part. Then you have the E, which I say stands for employees, but I think it's mainly the team that's going to get you there, right? You have to be focused on people. It's not about, culture is about people. It's not about your company itself, and it's not about little bells and whistles and things that you can give to your company as like a gym membership or anything like that. It's about the relationship that people have together and how they work together and how they work towards a common goal. And then in that section, I would say getting the right people on the team is one of the biggest things that you want to pay attention to in culture. To get nothing out of this talk, remember that the hiring process is how you build culture, right? It's not necessarily the people who are already there, because that may or may not be the best culture and fit, right? And if you do have great culture now, if you don't pay attention to your hiring process, you will also hire people just to fill a slot, and that never works. That never works to build culture. So if you get nothing else out of this, pay attention to your hiring process and make sure that that is a diligent process, that you're not just bringing anyone in to fill a slot. The next part I would say for center is the N, and that's, for me, that's no nonsense. Culture has to be a priority for you. You have to, this is not something that you can do without a plan. It has to be a priority. You have to put time into it. There has to be budget behind it. I mean, I work with people on training all the time, and the first thing that gets cut out of their budget is training when times get hard. And it's the absolute worst thing probably that they could do for themselves, because they're neglecting their people, right? And people have to be a priority, and your culture is an extension of your people. So there you go. You have to pay attention to your people. It has to be a priority. And the second thing is that every day, culture has to be part of your focus. So if you have a strategic plan, you have values, and you have goals, and you're not referring to them in your meetings, and you're not referring to them on a daily basis, and you're not making all your decisions in line with those, your culture is going to suffer horribly. And this is something that I think a lot of business people do, a lot of people do on their own. They write all these beautiful values, they write all these beautiful plans and goals, and then they just put them to the side, and they never review them, and they never use them, and it does nothing for you if you don't use them. So use them every day, in every meeting, talking about every decision, because that's how people, it's only by repetition that people will really remember what they're doing. And if you're making a tough decision and you say, does that come across, does that fit into our strategic plan? And everybody goes, I don't know, then that's a problem. And you're effectively building a culture contrary to what you're trying to build, and trying to get there. So you have to have it as part of every day. Then the T is to talk about it, right? Talking about means over communicate it, right? Get it out there, put it into everyday living. Make sure everyone has access to it, and that they can kind of tell you in their own words how they fit into the overarching mission and culture. And that we hope that they see themselves as part of something bigger, because that's what the culture really is. It's that something bigger that's kind of hard to talk about. Then I would say the E is about empowerment and expectations. Now, empowerment, as a leader, people always say, you have to empower your leaders, you have to empower your employees. You can't empowerment is something that people do for themselves. All you can do as a leader is provide the right materials and skills and conditions and leadership to get them to feel empowered. That's how you get them empowered. And then also knowing your expectations, right? Many times a boss, a manager, a leader, and their employees have a different idea of what is expected of them. And if you don't have an open communication of what you're expecting of them and what they expect from themselves, I think you're again doing yourself a disservice for culture, because you're setting yourself up for failure in that leadership aspect of what is expected of your people. And it's the easy exercise is for you to stand there and write out what you think is expected of them, and let them separately write out what they think you expect of them, and then compare notes. And if you do that on a regular basis, and you do that without fail, you don't wait for annual reviews to do that, it'll be much more effective in building a better culture for yourself. And then the final thing is the R, and I say review and revise. And at this point, you want your organization to be a learning organization. You want to be flexible, and you want it so that everyone knows the mission, everyone knows the values, everyone knows the plan, and everyone can tell you their little part. But with that, you'll never have to start from scratch, because everyone will kind of have this collective vision, what is going to happen, what you're going to do, and that becomes your culture. And if I had to add one more thing to that, I would say teach people how to be a servant leader. And that doesn't mean to do the work for people. That means you're not afraid to get in there. You're not afraid to help. Just like in a startup, you're willing to coach and teach and mentor, but there's still accountability. Yeah. I use the example of a special forces team. Everyone has the same skills. Everyone has, but then they also have these additional skills. So if one person fails, the other person can pick up the slack, and they push each other. They push each other to hold a standard, and it's a high standard. And if any one of them says that this person doesn't belong in the special forces, they kick them out. So this is it's a very interesting culture that they have, and I think using this as an example for your culture could also be useful.
Hey, Keith.
And that's pretty much it for today. If you have any questions or whatever, I'll just hand it over.
Great. Awesome job, Keith. Thank you so much. So you hit on a lot of really big points. I mean, one of the things that really stood out to me that is 100% true is that culture's there no matter what. It's going to go one way or the other. It's inevitable. It's always everywhere that we are. So the way that I really love to define the culture, and again, just kind of branching off what you said, is it 100% like you addressed, Keith. It's all about the people, right? It's about how the people think and how they act. That is what your culture is. How people in the organization are thinking and acting. So one of the big words that you had mentioned a lot, Keith, that I think really needs to be highlighted is simply accountability. It's just like you said with the Army, it's what are the expectations that we're holding? And then how do we hold each other accountable? For instance, if we came into a board meeting and said, look, we're not going to have any negative conversation, we're not going to end in negatives, and then somebody says something negative, do you let that slide, or do you address it immediately and say, hey, look, I understand that you're feeling this type of way, but again, based on our culture, we don't speak that way. Okay. So we got to cut this right there. And that also, just like we talked about last time, doesn't matter if they're your top performer, you got to check that person immediately, top performer or not. So, a lot of really big points. I want to share one more thing, and then I'm going to open it up for Q&A. But another point that you touched on, Keith, that I want to elaborate again is that I think Gary Vaynerchuk said this really well, but he said that sometimes we go into these organizations, primarily corporate America, and we see a foosball table in the corner, and there's like a little snack bar on the side, and they might have happy hour once a month. Guys, that is not culture. That is not how you build culture. Again, the culture is built on how you act and how you think. So I would love to hear from everybody. Questions, comments, experiences, concerns. Let's open the floor.
I guess my question is, when you're establishing a culture for, I guess for the first time when you're new into your business, what's some like the biggest challenges that you come across when you're looking to set yourself up in your own culture?
That's a great question. I think the initial challenge is being able to define what you're doing, especially if you're new together. You have to go through a process of actually doing things sometimes before you can even start to define what your goals are, what your values are, what your plan is, and then what your culture is. And I think it's possible and important to kind of maybe define the your version of like what you think you're looking to do. Like remember I said the plan itself is somewhat worthless, but the planning before you actually develop the plan is the most important thing you can do. So it's the analyzing that has to take place for you to figure out sort of what you're about, what you're doing. So I think over time you're gonna sort of develop things, but you can start out with some common values and adjust over time. Start out with some goals and see what happens as you sell, or sometimes your what you think your customer is going to be is not going to be your customer, so or you thought your ideal customer turns out to be something completely different. So yeah, I think the hardest part is getting started, but I think if you have a process of planning, and you can get to that. You can start somewhere and then you can revise as you go.
Yeah,
Awesome.
absolutely. I know Patty had a question, but I want to touch on that again real quick, because Ryan, that was a phenomenal question. I think that it's a very valid question, right? If you're a business owner, or even if you're just trying to change the culture and you're not necessarily a leader yet, in my eyes, there are 4 things that really roadblock it. And Keith just gave you the solution, right? It's a proper plan and strategy. That's how you solve it. The 4 problems and hindrances that I typically see for people is, number 1, difficulty. It's difficult to implement this stuff because it's uncomfortable. Number 2 is direction, right? It is to say, if somebody does the wrong thing, how do I navigate and direct them? If they do the right thing, how do I praise that publicly? The third part to that is deployment. Is deploying these acts, and that kind of branches off of that direction component. And then the 4th piece, and again, this is addressing, Ryan, the difficulty in changing or shifting a culture. That 4th piece is development. And basically what that means, another thing that Keith said is, hey guys, look, if you're a solopreneur, it's easy, right? If it's just you're like, oh yeah, cool, I can act and think this way. That's my culture. But once you start to get a bigger organization, how it becomes a lot more difficult. How am I developing this around a team of 10, around a team of 20, 100, 1,000? So again, to recap that, Ryan, the 4 things that I see that are difficult in implementing a shift in that culture is, number 1, the difficulty of it, the direction, the deployment, and then the longevity, the development. So I wanted to add that on there because I think that was a great question. And Keith, you did a great job again, because that's the solution, is a proper plan and strategy. That's how you kind of navigate through all those. Patty?
Yeah, I think that, putting attention to this, especially early on, I mean, you're going to develop a culture no matter what. So if you don't give thought to it, there's going to be certain habits that happen within your organization that just morphed, and you're not necessarily going to be happy. This is a great one, following the core values, because when you put those 2 things together, you can decide what you want your organization to look like. But like Keith says, it has to be verbalized. I mean, I'm with a company, and for 4.5 years, we hear the word ethos and about that every single week for 4.5 years. It's brilliant. It's brilliant because it's brought up on a consistent basis. I think that sometimes, and maybe in Ryan's situation, it's a little bit harder when you come into an organization that is already well developed, and you might not align with the culture of that company. Like, is it, when in that book, he talks about value, and you can say, well, one of our core values is integrity. Well, what does that really mean? Does that, you know what I mean? Like integrity is a common word, but does that mean we're going to treat each of our customers with generosity and with honesty and all those kind of things? But I think that it's harder for people that are going into an organization that culture is already there, you know?
I could,
Go ahead, Ben.
could I go, Keith? Yeah. I'm just gonna give my 2 cents based on just my experience. So in South Korea, I got pushed into a leadership position at an English language institute. There's a bunch of teachers and stuff like that. So from what I learned, and based on Ryan's question about challenge, number one, it takes time to change culture, and then allow yourself to have that time. And the second thing I started to identify are, what do I not like about this culture? And I'll tell you right away, the 2 things I wanted to change is never to hire, because Keith said it's about hiring, never to hire people that are negative or pessimistic. If they're negative and pessimistic, they just spread negativity, and it just grows and it drags everybody down. So I didn't want negative people. And the second thing was, I didn't want a fixed mindset. I wanted to hire people who had more of a growth mindset, the willingness to learn and adapt. And if I got people who are optimistic and willing to grow and had that mindset, it was just so much easier to change that culture. And so I got rid of some of the teachers that were negative, pushed them out, and hired some better ones, and it was so much better. So those are my 2 cents.
And Ben, you're really helping everyone else when you do that.
Yep. I agree. And myself.
And yourself.
Yeah. It's not easy managing people. So
I know of a perfect culture fail, and it just happened, I think, yesterday. Does anybody know what happened with better.com?
No.
You guys have no clue. Oh, this one's going to be good. So some asshole CEO decided, no, it gets better. From an IT perspective, this is ruffles my kosher feathers. So this guy decides to fire 900 people. And guess where he did it? He did it on Zoom. And so, you know, that to me is a culture fail. Imagine the morality and where people are. In fact, it made national news. So imagine where people are in that company. The fact that there's a CEO who complained about how much he didn't want to fire people, and he cried like a bitch the first time around, and now he has no problem sitting there and you know, cutting people off during the holidays. He is giving severance, though. I have to give him credit there. But it just, that to me is what you don't do in culture. And that was what Keith was saying, is that, you know, that sets a precipice, God, I'm gonna say that word forever, you know, for what everybody else is thinking in that company now. And this is how the CEO is firing people on a giant Zoom call that made national news. Imagine how he's gonna treat the rest of the people that work there, which is the other 85%. So I figure I share that culture fail of what not to do.
That's amazing. In the Culture Solution by Matthew Kelly, he says the primary thing about culture is treating people like people, and that's a prime example of not doing it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just Matt, thank you for sharing that story, because I think that there are, in my eyes, there are several things that people don't always do as leaders when developing culture. So I think it's important to address the things not to do, right? And you just addressed one of them. So one of those things to not do if you want to change culture is to hire or fire somebody. That's not necessarily the right approach, right? Another thing is that a lot of people get caught in restructuring or reorganizing. Again, not the most effective approach. Another one that I see all the time is where people they'll distribute a value statement, or they'll say, hey guys, here's a reminder of our core values. Again, not going to change the culture. Another one is changing the reward system. So if you're in a managerial level, or if you're an agent, or whatever title that you carry, and somebody changes that reward system on you, it's very deflating. Now, I've been in organizations where they do this like every month. It's like, oh, you have a commission structure like this, we're going to change it next month. And it just constantly changes. It demoralizes people. Another one is to form a team that isolates from the current or desired culture. That is another way to just crush your culture. Promoting somebody, and not just promoting somebody, but promoting the wrong person. And that kind of goes back to what Ben was saying, is that, I don't want those negative people, because then they're going to change the culture around us and everybody else. And it's magnetic. And then the last thing is to rewrite policies. So again, these are the things that you should not do if you want to change culture. So those are hire or fire somebody, restructure the organization, distribute some value statement or structure statement, form a team that's not in line with the current culture or desired culture, promoting the wrong person, and then rewriting policies. So how do we get the right culture then? Well, it's what Keith said. Not only is it to plan and strategize appropriately, but it's to treat people like people, have conversations. And the one thing that I really love for this, that always has served me extremely well, is that you promote in public. You want to build people up in public. You did an amazing job doing this. What you appreciate appreciates. Now, if you have to have negative conversations, you do not do that publicly. You quite simply ask that person to meet you in a private room, or you bring them into an office, or you have an individual conversation. And that's how you make those adjustments. Let's give an example. Hey, Matt, look, man, you brought up an incredible point. I really love how you talked about that story and shared that, yeah, to fire 900 people on Zoom, absolutely not the appropriate way to shift the culture. But I noticed when you said it, you got really fired up, right? And your emotion was high, and you threw out a couple curse words. And those are the type of things that we want to reduce a little bit, because this is an environment where we want to be able to serve people of all ages. And once we get, a couple curse words in there, we can't serve certain demographics. So, by the way, love your thoughts, love your energy, man. I love the fact that you get fired up, but that's just one of those little things that, hey, if you could just watch the words, that would be great. Okay, so that was just an example, obviously, and I didn't mean to call you out, Matt. I love you, man. But that was just a brief example. You know what I mean? And again, that's the situation where you want to praise people publicly, but if there's something that you want to change, those are the conversations you have privately, right? So anyway, I thought I'd throw that out there, because you guys are making some amazing points.
I want to add that, and I think what you just said is amazing. But when you look at Jim Collins, Good to Great, again, he one of the things that turned a company, allowed a company to come back after going down a bad path and really exponentially grow, was that the leaders were not afraid to make some of those decisions, though, right? If they had to rewrite in the entire culture, they had to start from the beginning. But I think what was key was that they brought from the information throughout the organization. They brought it from the bottom up, and they started from the top down. So the whole change had the support of the leadership, and then also they took input from everyone in the company, and that's how they made the decision to do this and then move forward as a group. This is a very military thing. When we do planning, everyone has a say. Everyone can argue, they can disagree, they can tell people of their concerns, they can give all kinds of hazards and every other thing they can throw out there while we're planning. But as soon as the decision is made, everyone goes, okay, I had my say, and they get on board and they move forward. And that's a I don't know how possible it is in civilian culture to do that, but I've seen it work in civilian businesses. I've seen it work a lot. So it is possible. It's just a matter of getting people on board and having the right people, and then making that part of the culture.
I know when I had my center, when I was interviewing people that wanted to come into the center, I stated this was a no drama facility. And what was interesting is I bet you in a 10-year period, I only twice had to take somebody aside and speak to them because we lived that on. There's no gossip. If there's an issue, and there can be issues, come to me, we'll work through it, or go to that person and work through it. But don't talk to this person and this person and this person and not the person that it was involved. So I stated that right up front. If you're a drama kind of person, this isn't the right place for you. It served me well.
That's an interesting topic too, because there's a whole thing around gossip, right?
Oh,
And if it doesn't fall into the buckets of your goals, your mission, or your strategic plan, and the person isn't there to defend themselves, right? Then it's gossip.
but then as the leader, we have to keep ourselves above that. That even if something annoys us, we either talk to the person directly or we don't talk about it. So we have to hold ourselves back to accountability.
And people are very uncomfortable as leaders. Some people are very uncomfortable as leaders bringing their people in and correcting them on the spot. And they wait until the end of the year to do it. And by the end of the year, you've already forgotten what just happened and why it's important. And it's kind of like blindsiding them, honestly, at the end of the year, saying, "Hey, remember in March when you did this? This is one particular reason why I say in a healthy culture, you're going to do on the spot corrections. You're gonna, like if Matt's words, for example, were a crowd displeaser, and it was part of your culture not to do that." Then, and I'm not saying that bad words are necessary. I mean, the Army's full of bad words. I hate to tell you, but when and everybody doesn't care, or maybe they do, but they don't say anything. I don't know. But but it's just a matter of communication in that sense, right? So, but if that's one of the things that turns people against each other, then maybe that is something to take out of the culture, right? And we become very PC with a lot of different things in our culture and how we offend people. But if I find that when people are when they really know each other, they don't mind some of the craziness. Like if you get passionate about something and you start to get angry about something, they're going to say something's wrong with him. Like he's not always like that. And they forgive a little, it's when you're, especially when you're with a larger organization, people don't know you very well, that they go, what did he mean by that? And it becomes a problem. And what you've been talking about is as far as stopping the issue at the top, at the minute that it starts, and then that's beneficial both ways. If that person says something and you think it's offensive, you should be able, as part of your culture, to go talk to that person and say, "Hey, you offended me," and there should be a dialogue. That also is part of culture.
Absolutely, Keith. And again, that just goes to show when we're talking about culture, this is how people think and act. So this is a professional setting to uphold boundaries, right? And it's very different than the personal life and holding boundaries. But and by the way, I like how Ben lit up when Patty was talking about drama free. So if you have anything to share on that, I'd love to hear it. But one of the other things, Keith, that you had mentioned is that in your Army experience is getting that buy-in from the team, from the community, right? And one really powerful way to do that is what I've experienced before, called an all hands meeting. And that may depend on the size of your organization. For example, if you are in several different states or locations, you may have a Zoom conference or whatever, where everybody gets on, you all have your buy-in, your feedback, but then once the decision's made, you're moving forward with that. Now it comes into implementation, right? So I thought that was interesting. And then another thing, guys, is there's, when we're in that leadership position and we're upholding this, there is something that we have to do. And that is quite simply to hold crucial conversations. Even if you only have even if it's just you and you have a VA right now, this is still paramount. I'm going to put this in the chat. There's a book, if you haven't read it or listened to it, it is called Crucial Conversations. I highly recommend this book. This will absolutely help take your game to the next level. The premise is quite simple. In any organization, environment, whatever, when there is somebody that holds the crucial conversations that nobody else wants to have, that person increases their value to the group immensely. So if you want to level up your value and your worth and your compensation or whatever in your workplace, hold the crucial conversations. It's not just about saying, hey, this is how I feel, think. It's about delicately promoting the right things. So I just wanted to share that. I did see a hand. So did anybody wanted to jump on that?
Sorry, I had one more thing to say about that, because you said, you know, the military has a process. At the end of every operation that we do, we hold something called an after action review, AAR. And that is where you get, it doesn't matter your rank, all rank comes off, everything's, you know, your leadership and everyone's equal. And you get to say, I think it should have gone this way, or I think it could have been better if we did this, or, you know, and also the strengths as well. But it's a non-recourse, non-confrontational kind of thing that everyone understands. You're trying to make yourselves better, and that's an interesting same concept that you just mentioned.
Permission to speak freely. Was it Matt, Patty? Did one of you guys throw a hand up?
I did.
Go ahead.
In terms of the PG version of me, I learned a lot so far already, and I'm sure how many people by show of hands have learned more than they did before at 9 o'clock? Because I sure as hell have. Okay, good. Everybody's using their deodorant today. All right, good. The one thing that has helped to enlighten me is how many toxic cultures I've been a part of. And so where, like exactly what Keith says, where you have promised somebody and they're playing the, you know, the musical chairs game, and everybody but that one person promised is complaining, and, you know, there's more drama than Lifetime TV. And so it's so counterproductive and not conducive. And I had that at the last major company I worked for. So where it was a toxic culture, and it wasn't a supportive system where it should have been. And I was miserable there for 3 months. I'm glad they fired me. So, but ultimately, it's, you know, I agree with that, where, you know, how the people treat you there and your experience there, and even customers I work for now, that the culture is toxic there. And so it's sad that factor, or that art is lost, and people downplay it, or for the most part totally ignore it. And I think that more companies need to, you know, work on that, especially like the better.coms of the world, you know, to make sure that people are treated like people and not like numbers or like statistics.
I could add to that what you just said. People want to be treated like people. One of the things I implemented, this is again at that English Institute, was a quarterly review, which was in my head, but I said these are one-on-ones. And so they all knew we had one-on-ones, and the way I structured it was 3 parts. And the first was just tell me about what's going on with your life. Just tell me what's on your mind. Just get them, just ask me the open-minded questions, just to get them to talk and get out whatever it is. And then the second part was like my real evaluation of how you're doing. And then I tied it to a performance bonus, and then what my expectations are. Actually, I asked them, you know, how are you going to improve? This is the areas that I see you can improve on. Get them to commit to it. And I said, great, and I'll help you. I'll give you the resources, and then we'll follow up at the next one-on-one. Those, and it was just 45 minutes. Those 45-minute one-on-ones really were powerful, because I think I gave them that time to just express themselves. And whatever it was, I was there just to listen, not to criticize, but to support and just to be there. So just a couple more 2 cents.
I hope you guys, I'm going to give the floor to you next, Patty. I hope you guys took notes on that, because that was fire right there. Thank you, Ben. And it is so important, you know, and he said, asking what's on your mind. Like, guys, how often do we put ourselves in situations where we don't feel comfortable talking to the people around us that are in our organization that may or may not directly affect our paycheck. I mean, these are the crucial conversations that need to be had. And part of what you said there too, Ben, is that element of rapport building. You know, asking people, hey, how's your family doing? And genuinely caring. How are your friends doing? You know, how do you spend your time outside of work? I see you in here every day. You know, what are you doing on your recreation, on your free time? And just having those actual conversations with people, but also holding those expectations and just being a person. So I love that. Thank you for sharing, Ben. Patty?
Yeah, you know, the book that we were talking about last night, we discussed a chapter and it was called Be a Class Act. So if you happen to be dealing with a toxic situation or a toxic person, the idea is to rise above that noise and be in control of yourself. You don't have to lower yourself to those standards just because they might be ranting and raving. It doesn't mean you rant and rave back to them. You have to be that class act that has more of a positive energy and, you know, just have that, you know, like maybe they're having a bad day or maybe not. Maybe it's a company with a toxic environment and maybe you don't want to be part of it. But if you have to be part of it, rise above. There's a trickle effect. You know, if you're in control of yourself and can handle a confrontation with mutual respect and be considerate of that person, the next time they speak to you, they're going to remember that. And so then maybe they won't be so crazy, you know?
Yeah, I think Patty's right. That's a leadership issue, you know, and I think it comes from both hiring and then also promoting. A lot of people get promoted into positions because they're good at their job. And then no consideration goes into whether they're a good leader, whether they can communicate, whether they can resolve conflict, whether they can set goals, be accountable, all of that stuff. And it's just a natural progression of, hey, you're a great salesman. Go teach these, go teach these people how to be salespeople. A lot of good salespeople can't teach another person how to be. They just say, do what I do. That's not the same thing as leadership. So yeah, I think it's vital that you take that into consideration in your promotions and hiring.
Absolutely. Matt?
I think this probably goes without saying for most of us, but much like Matt, I come from a background of terrible cultures in the financial industry. And sometimes people just get caught up on the word culture because it's sexy, much like core values. And everyone feels like, oh, we have to have a culture. We have to have core values, but they're meaningless when there is no actual substance behind them. And no one is living them day to day. They're only thrown around when someone's not doing something, right? They're used kind of as a metric of, well, you're not following the culture. You're not living the values. But meanwhile, the environment isn't being fostered to do so because no one believes it.
Or they throw the values at you when it's convenient for them and then turn it around and don't follow it themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And just like our core values conversation from last Tuesday is that it's about upholding it at any cost. You know, it doesn't matter what the situation is. It doesn't matter the person that you're having a conversation with. You have to uphold this culture at all costs. I want to share this with you real quick. I think this is really powerful. It's just like a little graph, but if you probably can't see that too well. So basically what it says is if you want to provide that cultural experience, you need 4 steps. 1, plan it, right? And that's what Keith has been promoting. Plan it out. Plan exactly what you're aiming for. Number 2, provide it. That's exactly what Matt just said. You have to also provide the culture that you're expecting, not just tell people about it or, hey, when you do something wrong, I'm going to call you out. No, you create the plan and then you provide that environment, like Matt was saying. Number 3 is ask about it. And that's really what Ben's talking about, right? Ben's talking about having those one-on-ones where you sit down with people and you follow up, you ask them questions. Now we're specifically talking about culture here. So Ben's was a little bit more in depth and personal, and I love that. But when we're talking about upholding this culture, it is simply to have a conversation either in a group or in a one-on-one. And then the 4th part to this is the interpretation of it. So what that basically means is when we say the interpretation is, okay, we're holding this culture, we're having this expectation, but how is it actually enacting? How is it relaying to our people? How does this transfer from the top all the way to our customer? you know, these are the conversations that we really need to get to. So just to recap that for you guys, it was plan it, provide it, ask about it, and interpret it. And by the way, I'm getting this out of Change the Culture, Change the Game. This is a phenomenal book. If we're talking on culture, I would highly recommend this one as well. So look, guys, we're at the very end here. There are a couple amazing people on this call that we haven't heard from. So, you know, Brian, Ashley, Jen, Lisa, do you guys have any last minute questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, or does anybody else before we really wrap up?
Mine might take too long. It was more about like, I know I have a company in mind where the culture is incredibly toxic, even though the founder of the company speaks exactly like you do about culture and says all the right things. But the reality is that it's horrible. Is it even possible for that same person to switch midstream and change everything? And I think the answer is probably too long.
I think the short answer is no.
Oh, that's too bad because it's his company. He owns it, but he's got a CEO who's toxic.
The only
COO
way to
who's
change
toxic.
that is to come to him as leaders and say, here's what we see. And if he doesn't like that and fires you all, well, you know, so be it, right? It's a leadership is sometimes is a gutsy thing you have to do. And if you see something that is completely wrong, and even if it's the leader, sometimes you just have to grab it and say, this is an issue, and we have to come together and talk about it. And so, honestly, even if everyone doesn't want to do it with you, and you're the one that says, I can't live like this. Like this goes completely against all of our values, all of our culture, all of our everything. I can't live like this. And you go in and talk to him privately first. Maybe that is enough. Maybe it wakes him up. But I'd say it's safer if everyone's on board with you.
Yeah, and okay. Thank you.
And that goes back to two things: to have those crucial conversations, and then the other part of that is the accountability. You know, it's really difficult when we're talking about the person that this is their baby and they're at the forefront of it. How do we hold them accountable? Well, first you have the conversation, and that might be one person, that might be a team collectively, whomever, but having that conversation. And then you say, hey, look, obviously I can't necessarily hold you accountable. Maybe we can bring in an outside source, or maybe there is a manager that's high enough up that can hold that accountability. And again, crucial conversation. Keith?
And maybe the first thing to bring up is to suggest that you have sessions where you can have open conversations, right? So that, you know, your agenda is to eventually confront him, but you sell it as, we're trying to make the organization better. We should be able to have these conversations.
That's what it is. And and I'm going to hand it over to you, Jen. I see your hand. But the way that I really like to layer this or frame this is what I call the Oreo. You guys may have heard of this before, but it's good, bad, good. So basically what that means is, and this is really brief, but, you know, good would be just like what Keith's saying. Hey, I love this company so much. I love the vision. I love the people and what we actually stand for. I want to see this business succeed. However, I feel that based on this and this, we are not moving in that proper direction. Now, in order for us to stay on pace and achieve these goals and move to the next level, I think it'd be really important if we address this, and then you just go from there. Jen?
Yeah, I think one other thing is to kind of evaluate too, because Lisa, you said that he says all the right things. Is that him just saying those things to say those things, or does he believe them, but has he lost that control over the culture? Because
I think he truly believes it. I think, and by the way, I don't work for this company. He's a good friend of mine. I'm friendly with the wife, but I have a bunch of friends that work there. He truly believes it, I think, but he's lost his way because he has two C-suite people around him that are toxic and are feeding him this bad info.
Yeah, and I think for me, you know, I'm somebody that I've always, if I can't control the culture of the larger group that I work for, I worked for Samsung for 8 years. I can't change the culture of that large of a group, but I could control the culture within my team. And I heard my mother say when I was in kindergarten, I've lived by this for years. I've always told people when I first start working with them, If I'm doing something I shouldn't, or not doing something that I should, it's your responsibility to tell me. I can't change it if I don't know about it. And if somebody's truly on board with that culture, they're going to respect that same philosophy. And, you know, kind of going back to what Patty said about gossip and rumors, it doesn't help me to change something that I'm hearing from other people. But if you come to me, I can tell you it. And I've told people in the past, I'm either going to tell you, you're right, I need to reevaluate that, or I may say, I'm sorry, you know, I had to do that for a reason. Or I'm going to say, well, it is what it is, unfortunately. And sometimes with Samsung, that was the answer I had to give. And I always hated that. But I think that's really important to live by, is I can't change it if I don't know about it. So come to me and let me know. And I've always really encouraged the people around me to coach me up as much as I'm coaching to them as well. And it helps me become a better manager.
Absolutely.
Hear,
Thank you
hear.
for sharing that, Jen. You nailed it on the head. So guys, we're gonna close out here. Any last minute thoughts or questions or anything before we close out? Ben, you're muted.
Can you help, let me share my screen here? This is
Yeah,
just
yeah.
a video, it's just a JPEG
Good.
that, okay. Have you guys ever seen this? The mission?
Yep.
So basically, what kind
Yes.
of leader do you want to be? And if you want to change culture, probably better if you're down here. So anyway, just want to show that. I love this one, and that's it.
Perfect image. I love that. So guys, you know, again, just to close out real quick, thank you all so much for your time. I think that the underlying message of culture, whether you're an entrepreneur, a solopreneur, or a business owner of a larger company, is again that it's about how the organization thinks and acts. So just I thank you guys so much for your time and making this possible. Amazing thoughts and feedback, incredible points. You guys did an amazing job. Have an awesome day. If you need anything, let me know. I'll see you guys next Tuesday.
Take care, guys.